I walked into my living room on Christmas morning and froze. The Christmas tree we'd carefully decorated for our 6-month-old daughter's first Christmas was bare. Completely stripped. Ornaments scattered across the floor, some broken, the special baby's first Christmas ornament I'd been saving since I was 16, shattered into pieces by the fireplace. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My mother stood in the center of the chaos, arms crossed, wearing that familiar expression of righteous satisfaction. "If you're going to exclude your own family from your daughter's first Christmas," she said coldly, "then maybe she doesn't deserve one at all." I stared at her, then at the destruction, then I did something she never expected. I smiled. Because what my mother didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that my husband wasn't just any lawyer. Justice Marcus Thompson of the United States Supreme Court was upstairs, putting our daughter down for her morning nap, completely unaware that his mother-in-law had just committed what would become a very interesting legal precedent, but to understand how we got to this moment, and why my smile was about to turn into her worst nightmare, you need to hear the whole story about control, tradition, and the day I finally learned that family doesn't give you the right to destroy someone else's joy. Growing up, I thought every family operated like ours. I thought it was normal for mothers to view their children's happiness as something that required committee approval. My mother, Patricia Whitmore, had turned family gatherings into elaborate performances where she was always the director, producer, and star. Her Christmas was her Oscar night. Every decoration had to be approved. Every gift had to pass her inspection. Every moment of joy had to flow through her first, like some kind of emotional customs checkpoint. When I was 8, she threw away my handmade Christmas card for my grandmother because the glitter was too messy. When I was 16, she returned the dress I'd bought for Christmas dinner because it was too attention-seeking. But it wasn't just about control, it was about hierarchy. In Patricia's world, there was always someone who deserved more, and that someone was never me. My older brother Daniel got the prime spot under the tree for his gifts. My younger sister Rebecca got the honor of placing the star on top. I got to clean up after everyone else and be grateful for the privilege. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, she scheduled my graduation party the same weekend as Rebecca's school play, making sure all the relatives would be too tired to properly celebrate my achievement. When I got into Harvard Law, she spent the entire announcement dinner talking about Daniel's new job at a local insurance company and how practical careers are just as important as flashy ones. I learned early that in the Whitmore family, love was a limited resource, and I was always at the back of the line. So I stopped expecting it. I focused on school, on building a life that didn't require their approval. I studied constitutional law not because it was prestigious, but because something about justice and fairness spoke to a part of me that had been silenced for too long. Law school was where I met Marcus. He wasn't the Supreme Court justice then, just a brilliant professor with kind eyes and a way of explaining complex legal principles that made you feel like the Constitution was a living, breathing thing designed to protect people like me. People who'd been told their whole lives that their voice didn't matter. Our relationship was quiet at first. Study groups that turned into coffee dates, legal discussions that stretched past midnight, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared principles. When I brought Marcus home for the first time, my mother's reaction was complicated. She loved the prestige. A federal judge, and later, a Supreme Court justice, was exactly the kind of son-in-law she could brag about at church. But she hated that Marcus saw through her immediately. He was polite, respectful, but he had this way of asking pointed questions that made her elaborate stories fall apart. When she'd go on about how difficult I was as a child, he'd ask for specific examples. When she'd make passive-aggressive comments about my career choices, he'd redirect the conversation back to my accomplishments. Marcus didn't just love me, he protected me in ways I'd never experienced. Not by fighting my battles, but by refusing to let anyone, even family, diminish who I was in his presence. When we got engaged, Patricia threw herself into wedding planning with the same controlling energy she brought to everything else. Our small, intimate ceremony became her grand social debut. Our quiet reception became her networking opportunity. Marcus watched it all unfold with the patient observation of someone who'd spent years studying human behavior from the bench. "Your mother," he said one evening as we reviewed seating charts she'd rearranged for the third time, "treats love like a performance where she's always the headliner." He wasn't wrong. But I still believed, somehow, that becoming a grandmother might change her. That holding her first grandchild might soften those sharp edges and help her understand what unconditional love actually looked like. I was devastatingly naive. When our daughter Sophie was born 6 months ago, Patricia's first comment wasn't about her perfect little fingers or her beautiful eyes. It was, "Well, she certainly has the Thompson nose. I hope she grows into it." Even in the delivery room, she managed to make our moment about her critique, but Marcus and I had found something beautiful in our little family. Sophie was this perfect blend of both of us, his thoughtful eyes, my stubborn chin, and a laugh that could fill up any room. We spent hours just watching her discover her own hands, planning her first Christmas with the kind of joy I'd never experienced as a child. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. This Christmas would be different. This Christmas would be about Sophie, not Patricia's performance. We'd have our own traditions, our own timeline, our own way of celebrating. I should have known my mother wouldn't go quietly. The first sign of trouble came in October when Patricia called to discuss Christmas arrangements. Obviously, we'll do Christmas morning at my house like always, she announced. I've already started planning the menu, and I think it's time Sophie learned about our family traditions. Actually, I said, keeping my voice calm, we're going to have Christmas morning at our house this year. Sophie's only 6 months old, and we want to establish our own traditions as a family. The silence on the other end was arctic. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice had that dangerous sweetness she'd perfected over the years. I see. So you're saying that 28 years of family Christmas tradition means nothing to you now? I'm saying we're starting our own tradition. You're welcome to come over Christmas afternoon for dinner if you'd like. If I'd like? The mask slipped. Sarah, I've been planning family Christmas since before you were born. Sophie deserves to experience the magic of a real Christmas, not some amateur attempt at, Mom. I cut her off. Sophie is 6 months old. She doesn't know what Christmas is yet. This is about us wanting to create our own memories as a family. With him, you mean. The way she said him made my stomach drop. Marcus had always been respectful to my mother, even when she didn't deserve it. But I could hear in her voice that this wasn't really about Christmas traditions. This was about control, and Marcus represented everything she couldn't manipulate. With my husband and daughter, yes. Fine. The word came out like a slap. But don't come crying to me when your intimate little Christmas turns out to be a disappointment. Some things require experience, Sarah. Some traditions are bigger than your need to prove you're independent. She hung up. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The same feeling I'd gotten as a child when I dared to want something different than what Patricia had planned for me. Marcus found me there an hour later, still holding the phone. That bad? He asked, settling into the chair across from me. I told him about the conversation, about the implicit threat in her voice, about the way she'd said his name like it was poison. She'll get over it, I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. She has to. Marcus nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in his legal mind. What if she doesn't? Over the next 2 months, Patricia launched what I can only describe as a campaign of Christmas terrorism. She'd call my siblings and paint me as the daughter who was ruining family traditions, for selfish reasons. She'd send articles about the importance of extended family in child development. She'd show up at our house unexpectedly with gifts for Sophie that were really just excuses to criticize our parenting choices. This formula is full of chemicals, she'd say, examining our baby supplies. In my day, mothers knew how to put their children first. Sophie is breastfed, Mom. The formula is for emergencies. Well, if you say so. The tone that suggested she knew better but was too polite to argue. The worst part was watching Marcus navigate these interactions. He'd grown up in a family where disagreements were handled with respect and honest conversation. Watching my mother's passive-aggressive manipulation was like watching him try to breathe underwater. Does she always? He started one evening after Patricia had spent 2 hours explaining why our Christmas tree was in the wrong spot in our living room. Always what? Make you feel like you're 5 years old again? He wasn't wrong. Every interaction with my mother stripped away years of growth, confidence, and self-assurance. I'd hang up the phone after her calls feeling like I was still that little girl desperate for approval that would never come. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I keep thinking she'll change, I admitted. That becoming a grandmother will flip some switch and she'll finally see what love without conditions looks like. Marcus took my hand. What if she doesn't? What if this is who she is, and we need to protect Sophie from it? The question hung in the air between us. Because protecting Sophie meant accepting something I'd been avoiding my whole life, that my mother's love came with strings attached, and those strings were designed to strangle, not support. 3 weeks before Christmas, the calls escalated. I've been thinking about our conversation, Patricia began during one of her daily check-ins. And I've decided you're right. You should have Christmas at your house. I was so shocked I nearly dropped the phone. Really? Yes. In fact, I'd like to help. Why don't I come over Christmas Eve and help you decorate? We can make it a special grandmother-granddaughter tradition. Every instinct I had screamed danger, but I was so desperate for her approval, so exhausted from fighting, that I ignored them. That would be nice, Mom. Wonderful. And Sarah? I'm proud of you for standing up for what you want. It shows real maturity. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. Marcus was less convinced. She gave up too easily, he said when I told him about the call. Maybe she's finally learning to respect boundaries. Or maybe she's planning something. I wish I'd listened to him. I wish I'd trusted the instincts that had kept me safe for 28 years. But I was so hungry for my mother's acceptance that I ignored every red flag, every warning sign, every lesson I'd learned about who Patricia Whitmore really was when she didn't get her way. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and the kind of crisp winter air that makes everything feel possible. Sophie was babbling in her high chair, fascinated by the colored lights on our tree. Marcus was in his study, finishing up some year-end court business. I was making hot chocolate and actually feeling hopeful about our family Christmas when Patricia arrived. She came bearing gifts, compliments, and that bright smile that always preceded her worst behavior. The house looks beautiful, she gushed, kissing my cheek. And Sophie? Oh, my darling granddaughter, you're going to have the most magical first Christmas. For 2 hours, it was perfect. We decorated cookies, wrapped presents, and Patricia actually seemed genuinely happy to be there. She helped me rearrange some ornaments, took pictures of Sophie under the tree, and even complimented the dinner I'd planned for the next day. I owe you an apology, she said as we sat by the fireplace, Sophie sleeping peacefully in her bouncer. I was so focused on tradition that I forgot what Christmas is really about. Family. Love. New beginnings. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was the mother I'd always hoped for, always believed existed somewhere underneath the control and criticism. I'm just glad you're here, I said. Me too. She squeezed my hand. Now, why don't you get some rest? Tomorrow's going to be a big day, and new mothers need their sleep. I'll just finish tidying up down here. I kissed Sophie goodnight, hugged my mother, and headed upstairs feeling something I hadn't felt since childhood, the pure anticipation of Christmas morning. I should have known better. I should have remembered that my mother's kindness always came with a price, and the bill was always higher than I could afford to pay, but I was so desperate to believe in the possibility of change, so hungry for her love, that I walked right into the trap she'd been setting since that phone call in October, because Patricia Whitmore wasn't done with me yet. She was just getting started. I woke up Christmas morning to the sound of Sophie crying. It was earlier than usual, but babies don't follow holiday schedules. Marcus stirred beside me as I slipped out of bed. I'll get her, he murmured, half asleep. No. Stay. I want to bring her down for her first Christmas morning. I padded down the hall to Sophie's room, expecting to find her standing in her crib, arms outstretched and ready to start the day. Instead, I found her room ice cold, the window wide open, snow blowing in across her changing table. My heart stopped. I rushed to her crib, empty. Panic flooded my system until I heard her crying from downstairs. I ran down the steps, taking them 2 at a time, following the sound of her distress. That's when I saw the living room. That's when I found my mother standing in the center of the destruction she'd created. If you're going to exclude your own family from your daughter's first Christmas, she said, not even looking at Sophie, who was crying in her bouncer in the corner, then maybe she doesn't deserve one at all. The Christmas tree we'd spent weeks decorating was stripped bare. Every ornament, including ones from my own childhood that I'd been saving for Sophie, lay broken on the floor. The presents we'd wrapped so carefully were torn open, contents scattered everywhere. The stockings Marcus and I had hung with such hope were pulled down and shredded, but the worst part, the detail that made my blood freeze, was Sophie's, baby's first Christmas ornament. The one I'd bought the day I found out I was pregnant. It lay in pieces by the fireplace, deliberately shattered. You opened her window, I said, my voice deadly calm as I moved to pick up my daughter. In December. She could have gotten pneumonia. Oh, don't be so dramatic. A little fresh air never hurt anyone. Although if you were a more attentive mother, you would have heard her crying sooner. I held Sophie close, feeling her tiny body shivering against me. She was cold, scared, and had been crying alone while my mother methodically destroyed the Christmas we'd planned for her. That's when Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs. He took in the scene below, the destruction, my mother's defiant stance, me holding our crying daughter, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to something I'd never seen before, judicial fury. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice carrying the same authority that commanded silence in the Supreme Court, I need you to explain to me exactly what happened here. Patricia's confidence flickered for just a moment. This is a family matter, Marcus. Sarah and I are having a discussion about priorities. By destroying property, opening windows in a baby's room during winter, and leaving a 6-month-old infant crying alone in a cold room. His tone was measured, precise, the way he spoke when delivering verdicts. Ma'am, what you've described isn't a family discussion. It's criminal behavior. Criminal? Patricia laughed, but it sounded forced. Don't be ridiculous. I'm her grandmother. I was teaching Sarah a lesson about what happens when you abandon family tradition. Marcus descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. You entered our home without permission, destroyed our property, and endangered our child. In legal terms, that's breaking and entering, destruction of property, and child endangerment. I have a key. Patricia protested. Given to you for emergencies, not for unsupervised access to commit crimes. Marcus had reached the living room now, and I could see him cataloging every detail with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades evaluating evidence. Sarah, please take Sophie upstairs and call 911. Marcus, wait, I started. No. His voice was gentle when he looked at me, but firm. This ends now. Sophie was endangered. That's not a family matter, it's a legal one. Patricia's face went white. You wouldn't dare. Mrs. Whitmore, I've spent 20 years on the bench watching families destroy themselves because no one was willing to draw clear boundaries. Your behavior this morning crossed legal lines, not just personal ones. But I'm family. Sarah, tell him this is ridiculous. Tell him we can work this out between us. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. At 55, Patricia Whitmore was still beautiful, still charismatic, still capable of making people believe her version of reality. But standing in the wreckage of my daughter's first Christmas, holding my cold and frightened baby, I finally saw her clearly. She wasn't a controlling mother who loved too much. She was someone who viewed other people, including her own family, as props in her personal performance. Sophie wasn't her beloved granddaughter, she was a supporting character who'd forgotten her lines. No, Mom, I said quietly. We can't work this out. Because this isn't about Christmas traditions or family loyalty. This is about you believing you have the right to hurt people when they don't do what you want. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Marcus's position meant the call was taken seriously, but honestly, the evidence spoke for itself. Broken ornaments, destroyed gifts, an infant who'd been left in a cold room, it painted a clear picture of deliberate destruction and endangerment. Patricia tried to charm the officers, explaining that this was just a family disagreement blown out of proportion. But when they asked her to explain why she'd opened a baby's bedroom window in December, why she'd destroyed hundreds of dollars worth of decorations, why she'd left an infant crying alone, her explanations started to sound increasingly desperate. I was making a point, she kept saying. I was teaching my daughter about consequences. Ma'am, the younger officer said, his tone professional but incredulous, what consequences require endangering a 6-month-old child? They arrested her. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with something I'd never seen. In her eyes before, genuine shock that someone had finally said no and made it stick. This won't hold up, she called out. She's my daughter. Sophie is my granddaughter. You can't keep your family apart. Marcus stepped closer to me as the police car pulled away. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, I can. It's called a restraining order. And given this morning's events, I expect we'll have no trouble obtaining one. After they left, Marcus, Sophie, and I sat in our destroyed living room in complete silence. Sophie had finally stopped crying and was looking around with that curious expression babies get when they're trying to understand their environment. The irony wasn't lost on me, she was the only one of us who seemed to be adapting to our new reality. I'm sorry, I said finally. For what? For not seeing this coming. For putting Sophie at risk. For, Sarah. Marcus took my hand. You're not responsible for your mother's choices. You're only responsible for what happens next. What happened next was a restraining order hearing 3 days later. Patricia showed up with a lawyer and a story about being a devoted grandmother who was being kept from her grandchild by an overzealous son-in-law who didn't understand family dynamics. Marcus represented himself, which in retrospect was probably intimidating for the opposing counsel. When it was his turn to present evidence, he laid out the case with surgical precision, photographs of the destroyed living room, medical documentation of Sophie's cold exposure, testimony from the responding officers, and a detailed timeline of Patricia's escalating behavior over the past 3 months, but the moment that sealed it was when he submitted video evidence. Your Honor, Marcus said, pulling up footage on his laptop, our home security system captured the events of Christmas morning. I'd like to submit this evidence showing the deliberate nature of Mrs. Whitmore's actions. Patricia's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. We watched on screen as my mother methodically destroyed our Christmas decorations, opened Sophie's bedroom window, and then sat calmly in our living room reading a magazine while our daughter cried upstairs. The footage was damning. It showed someone who wasn't acting in emotional distress, but carrying out a calculated plan. The judge, an elderly woman who'd probably seen every family conflict imaginable, watched the entire video without expression. When it ended, she looked directly at Patricia. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been on this bench for 30 years, and I've seen grandparents fight for visitation rights in genuinely heartbreaking circumstances. This is not one of those cases. What I see here is someone who endangered a child to make a point about holiday traditions. The restraining order is granted for 1 year, renewable based on compliance." Patricia's face crumbled. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother look truly defeated. Outside the courthouse, her lawyer approached Marcus. "Justice Thompson, perhaps we could work out some kind of supervised visitation arrangement? Mrs. Whitmore is genuinely remorseful." Marcus looked at him with the same measured expression he'd worn throughout the hearing. "Counselor, your client had the opportunity to demonstrate remorse when she was destroying my daughter's Christmas and endangering her safety. She chose vindication over accountability. The court has ruled." That evening, as I fed Sophie her bottle and watched Marcus rebuild our Christmas tree with new ornaments he'd somehow found time to buy, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete peace, not the exhausted quiet that comes after a fight, but genuine tranquility. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the next phone call, the next manipulation, the next crisis manufactured by someone who confused love with control. "Do you think she'll change?" I asked Marcus as he hung a new baby's first Christmas ornament, dated correctly, not a replacement for the broken one. "Does it matter?" he replied. "She can change or not change. Either way, Sophie grows up in a home where her Christmas mornings aren't held hostage to someone else's emotional needs." 6 months later, we received a letter from Patricia. Not to me, but to Marcus, which was telling in itself. She'd completed court-ordered anger management therapy and wanted to discuss reconciliation opportunities that would be legally appropriate and professionally supervised. Marcus showed me the letter and waited for my response. "What do you think?" he asked. I looked at Sophie, now almost a year old, pulling herself up on furniture and laughing at everything she saw. She was growing up in a home filled with unconditional love, clear boundaries, and parents who protected her joy rather than weaponizing it. "I think," I said slowly, "that if she's genuinely changed, she'll understand why the answer is not yet. And if she hasn't changed, she'll try to make us feel guilty for protecting our daughter." The response came within a week. Not from Patricia's lawyer, but from Patricia herself. A long, detailed letter explaining how unfair the restrictions were, how she was being punished for loving too much, and how keeping Sophie from her was just as bad as what she'd done to us. Marcus read it and handed it to me with a small smile. "Still want to know if she's changed?" I folded the letter without finishing it. Message received. A year later, we celebrated Sophie's second Christmas in our own home, with our own traditions, surrounded by people who loved us unconditionally. My siblings came. They'd slowly started to understand that Patricia's version of events didn't match reality. Marcus's family flew in from Chicago. Our friends brought their children. It was chaotic and loud and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. Sophie, now walking and babbling constantly, helped us hang ornaments and laughed when we sang Christmas carols off-key. She didn't know that other families fought about holidays, didn't know that some grandparents used love as a weapon, didn't know that the peace she was growing up in had been hard-won, and that was exactly how it should be. Late that Christmas night, after all the guests had gone home and Sophie was asleep in her crib, Marcus and I sat by our tree drinking wine and watching the lights twinkle. "Do you miss her?" he asked quietly. I considered the question honestly. I miss the mother I thought she could become. But I don't miss walking on eggshells or protecting Sophie from someone who should be protecting her instead. "Any regrets about the restraining order?" "Only that it took me 28 years to realize that love isn't supposed to hurt." Marcus raised his glass. "Sophie's third Christmas. And fourth, and fifth, and every one after that," I added. We clinked glasses. And I felt that same sense of peace I discovered in the courthouse that day. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of safety. Not the quiet of submission, but the calm of boundaries held firm. My mother had tried to destroy Sophie's first Christmas because she couldn't control it. Instead, she'd given us something much more valuable, the certainty that we would never let anyone hold our family's joy hostage again, and that, I realized, was the greatest Christmas gift of all. The restraining order was renewed that spring, and the spring after that. Patricia made a few more attempts at reconciliation, but they always came with conditions, expectations, and thinly veiled threats about legal consequences if we didn't comply. Marcus would read these letters with the same detached interest. He brought to reviewing legal briefs, then file them away in a folder labeled evidence. He wasn't being cruel, he was being careful. Because as he explained to me once, people like Patricia don't change their behavior, they just change their tactics. The pattern is always the same, he said. Escalation, consequence, apparent remorse, then escalation again. The only way to break the cycle is to refuse to participate in it. Sophie is 3 now. She's bright and funny and completely unafraid to take up space in the world. She asks for what she needs, expresses what she feels, and has never once had to earn love through performance. Sometimes I watch her playing and think about the Christmas morning that changed everything. Patricia destroyed our tree thinking she was taking away our celebration. Instead, she gave us something infinitely more precious, the knowledge that we could protect what mattered most. My daughter will grow up knowing that Christmas morning is about joy, not control. That family means safety, not submission. That love doesn't come with strings attached, and the people who truly care about you don't try to destroy your happiness when they don't get their way, and if anyone ever tries to tell her differently, well, they'll have to get past her father first, because some boundaries, once drawn, are never meant to be crossed again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.